One of the worst realizations dads have after separation is that they'll do everything that people tell them to do and still become a powerless bystander in their own children's lives. And I bet that many of you, just like me, spent years believing that if you just keep showing up, you keep paying, you keep driving, you keep fighting the good fight, and keep proving that you care about your kids, that you'd somehow get your life with your kids, your sons, your daughters back. But unfortunately, many of us were gravely, gravely mistaken. And I want to talk about it. What I'm going to do is show you what men lose, why the grief keeps returning, how quickly the fight depletes them, and why none of that effort really guarantees any real involvement at all. And then I want to talk a little bit about the decision that nobody prepares men to make, when continuing to fight is no longer preserving their relationship with their kids, but instead is destroying what remains of their lives. And before we're done, I'm going to read something that I wrote after one of the last major experiences that I had with all of my 3 daughters all together at the same time, because I think it shows better than anything else what this realization eventually looks like. Now, let me start out of the gate that when I say during this conversation that you may have to say goodbye forever, I'm not saying that it means goodbye to your kids forever. Yes, that does happen to some dads. But for the far greater majority of us, it means saying goodbye to the fatherhood that you imagined having with them. So let me start with this context. As many of you are aware, my book Confessions is a 2.5-year, 900 handwritten page journal of sorts that I wrote during and after my separation and divorce, with a 6 or 7 year follow-up for the last couple of hundred pages in there. I published Confessions about a year ago, and what I did was I had ChatGPT do a content analysis of Confessions, and here's how it breaks down. Again, it's a 600-page book at this point. So my daughters appeared on roughly 286 pages of this book. My comments and reflection about bills, money, affordability, and financial strain appeared on about 169 pages. The trying, the continuing to fight, the sacrificing for my kids, the wanting to quit or never quitting, and giving up, those types of conversations and things I wrote about show up on 168 pages. Topics about parenting involvement, getting information about my children, and decision-making relative to parenting appeared on roughly 128 pages. Now, the crying, the wanting to cry, or having cried appeared on 82 pages, with around 130 individual references. This is in just less than a 2.5-year period. And custody, courts, judges, lawyers, and visitation appeared on roughly 89 pages. So that's a little bit of a real-life context that we'll never get from a documentary, any research studies, or any organizational reports. And I really do hope that it gives some perspective as I set up this discussion. Yes, it's just one dad's experience. I do understand that. But I have a feeling that it can be generalized much wider than most people imagine. Okay, so let me get into the 6 themes that I've identified both personally and professionally from research, speaking and working with guys, and documenting my own experience. Theme number 1 that dads experience after separation. You don't lose just time with your kids. You lose ordinary, normal fatherhood. That's, of course, losing everyday parenting decisions. You're not able to be with them physically. We discuss those things quite a bit, and those are common. But it's those developmental stages. The first time that they brush their teeth without being told. When they're going through potty training. Those developmental stages, you're going to miss a lot of it. You're going to lose out on the holidays, the Christmas morning, the bedtime stories, school events, a lot of times plays and dance recitals. And children gradually building their own lives in which you are no longer a central piece of it. Those are things that you miss. It's not just, again, the time that you're losing. It's everything that goes with it. You're also going to lose the fact that later reconciliation can't restore lost childhood years. You may still see your children and still lose the experience of raising them. People often treat custody as a scheduling problem and a conflict of sorts. But the real loss is cumulative. You stop knowing the small things. Nobody's giving you information. You can't be there when their habits form, their personalities change, when they develop friendships with the neighborhood kids, and they start making decisions on their own. Listen, a visit can be meaningful, but it can't reproduce daily fatherhood like when you were in the home. So I hope that this is just at least a little bit of an introduction of what to prepare for. You're not just going to miss your children. It means becoming peripheral to their everyday lives. Theme number 2 is that the grief repeats instead of going away or ending. And here I'm talking about the recurring pain after each visit. Right? So when you return them to their mother's house, it's those drop-offs. And then you drive home back to your place in an empty car. As I mentioned, those Christmas holidays, in the Easter, Thanksgiving, in the isolation that comes with it. All of these increasing your grief, and they just repeat year after year, especially in those early years. It just never ends. Let me give you just one little story, and this is what I'm going to refer to here in Confessions here in just a bit. One of those was when I came to the realization that in the years to come, I was going to have a very, very reduced contact and presence with my daughters. For me, I can isolate it to almost a single day. And I'll touch on that here in just a moment. But it's the psychological danger also of making children your only remaining reason to live. That happens for a lot of guys. So the grief of separation is unique because the kids are not completely gone. Yes, you'll see them every couple of weeks or more frequently than that, if allowed, right? You'll feel connected again when you're with them during those days, and then you have to lose them all over again. So every reunion is also the beginning of the next goodbye. You may spend days or weeks looking forward to seeing them, whether it's for a birthday, a holiday, or just a normal weekend. And then you'll briefly feel normal again with them, and then crash out afterwards as soon as you drop them off, as I mentioned, at their mother's house again. And over time, that grief can spread into other parts of life. You start sleeping less. Your work is disrupted. You can't concentrate. For a lot of guys, even sobriety. It affects relationships, their physical health, their sense of identity for many of them. And unfortunately, for many of them, their desire to remain alive. So when I talk about grief, it's not just one instance. And it doesn't even necessarily get easier year after year. I still have a lot of challenges with it. The third theme that I want to speak about is the impossible resource provision. Whether it's money or transportation, like it was for me, for several years, I was the only one doing the transportation, the transporting children back and forth from my house to their mother for years. It was about a 1-hour drive throughout most of those years. She refused to do it, and we'll get into details, but when I started to refuse the returning them to her house, that's when shit hit the fan. And this is what I mean when I talk about impossible resource provision. It's also the court expenses, education. Maybe your kids are in a private school. And for me, it was a 1-hour distance, that geographic distance. For some guys, it's even more. And you're going to be required to provide that transportation. You might also lose career opportunities. And the declining return on each additional sacrifice is immense. So the impossible resource provision goes beyond just the finances in the the child support. It moves on to everything else. For example, at one time, because I lived in Chicago, I did not own a vehicle. I didn't need one. So I was renting a car by the hour every time I wanted to see my children or pick them up and bring them to my house or return them to their mother. It's those little things, those little provisions that just add up continually. Now, this may be the most practical part for a lot of dads because we're often given contradictory instructions. Let me know if you can relate to this. We're told things like work, like work more so you can provide more. Work less so you can be available for your kids. Live nearby your kids even if there's no job opportunities around there. But also get a better job even if it requires moving. Spend more money on court. Don't you love your kids? So those are, again, the impossible provisions and the things that we're told to continue to do. And none of this can maximize none of us can maximize all of those at once, right? For me, the driving was not just an inconvenience. It consumed real money, hours, and energy, and quite honestly, employment flexibility for me. Yet the burden of preserving that relationship with my kids remained primarily mine. In fact, almost entirely mine. So at some point, another $1,000, another court filing, another missed work day to see your kids, or another 5-hour drive to see them may produce almost no measurable involvement in the actual relationship. And I know that that sounds fatalistic, but it's the basic reality of having finite resources. And real quick, before I move on to this next one, I did want to mention that I had to make a very difficult decision with this channel and this type of content. The child support and the custody and the divorce type topics, I had to make a difficult decision about how that's presented here on YouTube. I'm not going to do a public video on that. I did make an announcement and covered that in a members only video. If you are interested in getting my content early and some of that information behind the scenes that I'm not necessarily willing to share publicly, I'd love to have you as a channel member. Check right up here, and I'll put a link in a card up here as well. So thanks. I'd love to see you there. Let's talk about this fourth theme, and that's the responsibility with having almost zero control. Here I'm talking about exclusion from school and medical information. For me, it was contacting my daughter's school. I believe at one time one was in high school, two were in middle school. And I contacted them to get information about their grades, about their schoolwork, how well were they doing, even just what events are happening. And I was refused that information. I went round and round with the superintendent and the principal at that school. And they told me that the records show that not only was I not given access to that, but their mother had intentionally not checked a box, or I forget exactly what it was, so that I could get that information. Right? So when we're talking about no control, but you've got all the responsibility, you will have lack of authority to make decisions, medical decisions about your children. Whether or not they're allowed to start dating or get their ears pierced. What is their curfew and their bedtime? There's no unilateral decisions, really, that many of you will be able to be a part of. Activities will be scheduled during your time. That happens to a lot of us. Happened to me, and it was very contentious. As I mentioned, transportation being treated as your responsibility. You've got to do it. You've got all that responsibility, but you can't necessarily, for many of us, control when we see our kids. Yet when we do, it's all our entire responsibility to make it happen. So this is one of the central contradictions. You may be told to remain involved while still being denied the information, the cooperation, quite literally the access, and the authority that's required to be meaningfully involved. The relationship doesn't depend only on your effort. It also depends, as many of you know, depends on the mother, the courts, and the schools. Information and access that you have will be dictated by how far away you live from them, or if the mother moves. The children's changing schedules, whether it's activities or just hanging out with their friends. And eventually the children's own willingness to continue having a relationship with you at all. So you have no control really of any of those things. I'm sorry, and any of the decision making, but you do have the responsibility of taking care of all of those. So let's talk about theme number 5 that dads experience after separation and divorce. And that's guilt despite continued effort on their behalf. So here it's fear that the children will believe that you abandoned them. That's real guilt. It's also fear that they'll hate you. Taking responsibility for your own mistakes while still being blamed for later outcomes. It's trying to prove your love through finances, through more court documents and filings, as I mentioned. The difference between accountability and total blame. And one of the deepest sources of guilt for a lot of guys is the fear that the children will someday conclude or be told, Dad left us. Dad chose something or someone else. Dad didn't even try hard enough. And that fear right there can keep you spending indefinitely because you're no longer pursuing just contact with your kids. You're trying to control the story that's being told about you. But there's no guaranteed amount of effort that will prevent a child from misunderstanding the truth or, quite honestly, being lied to about it. You can document what happened, you can remain available, you can communicate appropriately, and try to preserve a path back to you. But you can't fully control what they're being told or what they eventually believe. So there's a lot of guilt that dads experience after separation and divorce. And theme number 6 I want to discuss that dads experience after separation and divorce is acceptance is not abandonment. Let me clarify here, because this one is extremely important. And this is a culminating reality that not enough fathers are able to reach or to accept. At some point, you'll be required to make some very difficult decisions. It could be dropping the custody fight, recognizing diminishing returns on your efforts to be involved. It could be setting a resource ceiling. I've only got so much money. I've only got so much time. What more can I do? And for a lot of us, it's accepting that we've got a life to rebuild. For me, it was moving to another town, an hour and a half away for my kids to go to graduate school. I had a life to rebuild. Oh, but she was pissed. At one point, she was so pissed because rather than living in an apartment with roommates, when I was finally able to, a couple years after divorce, I got an apartment on my own, so I didn't have roommates. And I had bedrooms and belongings, wardrobes for my daughters. Oh, but she was pissed about that. So I was trying to move on and accept that, okay, I can't be there for everything and do everything. Doesn't mean I'm abandoning my kids, but I do have a life to continue to rebuild. And you're going to get pushback on that. Part of it also is just refusing permanent suspended grief. For a lot of guys, that lasts so long, and I was guilty of this as well. I don't know if I would say necessarily guilty, but it happened to me. My grief lasted much longer, I think, maybe than it does for a lot of guys. So the lesson here is stopping an unwinnable battle is not the same as stopping your love for your children, or it doesn't mean that you stop loving them. So part of the acceptance is also making very tough decisions. Like, I'll no longer spend money that I don't have on litigation with almost no likelihood of changing the outcome. For a lot of guys, it's, I'll no longer sacrifice every career opportunity to remain close to the children that I'm rarely permitted to see anyway. Or perhaps even, I'll no longer repeatedly expose myself to rejection just to prove that I care. I've got a whole list here. Let me know what it is for you. And listen, that's not nearly the same thing as quitting on the children. I understand that. Society will tell you that you're giving up. But those of us who have been through it, we get it, and we got your back. You know, it may be letting go of the belief that suffering will somehow prove that you love your kids, right? That maybe they'll come back. Listen, maybe they won't. Maybe they'll eventually understand, and maybe they never will hear the full story from you. But you still have a life to live. You're allowed to protect your money, your finances, your energy, your health, your future, and your job, all of it. You can have a right to protect all of that yourself, and it should be able to be done without guilt. You can love your children without allowing the loss of them to be the end of you. So this now brings me to the hardest part of this conversation. As I mentioned, I can explain why acceptance is not abandonment. I can tell you that there may be a point when continuing the same fight will cost you more without ever bringing you any closer to your kids. But I think the closest way to show what that realization actually looks and feels like is to share what I wrote after, as I mentioned, one of the last major events that I had with all 4 of us together. It was 13 years ago from now, and 7 years after divorce, when they were about ages 8 to 14. So let me read a little bit from Confessions and what guys experience after separation and divorce. In August 2012, I finally had an opportunity to take my daughters on a family vacation to Disney. And after the vacation, I remained in Orlando for a professional conference. I'll never forget driving the girls to the airport in Orlando. In August 2012, I finally had an opportunity to take my daughters on a family vacation to Disney. After the vacation, I remained in Orlando for a professional conference. I'll never forget driving the girls to the airport in Orlando, watching them walk down the catwalk to the plane, and watching that plane take off. I knew it was the beginning of a new era, an era in which I would rarely see them, and during which I hoped to God that they wouldn't hate me for it. If I hadn't seen it coming in the months earlier and the years, and I hadn't been so hardened by this system and all of life's dysfunction, I would have cried right there in the terminal all night. Instead, I did as men are expected and trained to do. I held my shit together and I didn't say a word. But I cry about it now when I'm all alone. That was 12 months ago. It's now August 2013, and since that fateful goodbye in Orlando, I've seen Chloe about 5 times. I've seen little Lindsay and Milo a bit more frequently when their mother brings them to me. They're less busy with activities and social lives than their older sister is, so they have more time for me these days. But I haven't been able to afford mandated support in addition to 100% of the transportation and to support the girls when they are here with me in Chicago. I realize that many people will respond with statements akin to, "But those are your children. You need to keep up the fight. Don't quit on them. They need you to be in their lives and to know that you love them." And to this I respond by asking, to what end? What will be the result of my fight? Do they really need me to be involved? And is it even possible for me to be? I find and have experienced a lot of shame in the process. Fathers are encouraged and even demanded to be a part of their children's lives. Everyone from President Obama in his Father's Day speeches to psychologists and media shock jocks, they all condemn fathers for not being involved with their children. And in response, millions of them every year fight the good fight to be a father that everyone demands them to be. These men are ridiculed, chastised, condemned, and shamed for their, quote, deadbeat behaviors. They also collectively invest billions of dollars filing motions to gain or share custody in order to be exactly what everybody wants them to be, like good little soldiers. Then these men show up in obscure courtrooms across the country to plead their cases and to prove what upstanding citizens they are, asking only to see their children more frequently and to be a part of their upbringing. In turn, many are never given the parental authority that is rightfully theirs, and many must be supervised during their 2-hour-per-week visits with their children. Nearly all are legally prevented from being what society demands them to be. Yes, dads get a bad rap and no credit from the courts. But I don't think they should be held responsible for not being involved. And I don't blame them for giving up. Now, when I wrote that, I wasn't saying that men should stop loving their kids or close the door on them. That's not even possible for us. What I wanted to do was recognize that for far too many of us, continuing that fight will consume more money, health, other resources, and sometimes our very lives. So we can leave the door open, and we can remain available. And we can try to preserve those paths and keep them open, and hopefully one day our kids will really know what happened, that they'll get to the truth. But listen, we're also allowed to live. So if you've been through any of this, I get it, and it's why I do what I do. I hope that you all are doing really well. Take care of yourselves. Be nice to each other.